I am Julian, I am 29 years old, and exactly 1 year ago, on what was universally supposed to be the single most sacred and joyous day of my entire life, I stood completely and utterly alone in the dressing room of a small stone chapel. Not a single member of my blood-related family showed up to my wedding. While I was standing there in my tailored tuxedo, watching the hands of an antique grandfather clock tick relentlessly past the time my ceremony was supposed to commence, my parents made it abundantly clear that they had much more important places to be. My own father, the man who had looked me directly in the eyes just days prior and solemnly promised to stand by my side as my best man, sent me a text message right as the bridal march was supposed to start. It read, "Things are really celebratory here, sorry son." They had all collectively chosen to attend my older brother's lavish baby shower instead, laughing, drinking expensive champagne, and taking perfectly filtered photos while I sat in an empty room, listening to the heavy, suffocating silence of my own abandonment. But there was one massive, reality-shattering thing my family did not know. The quiet, humble landlord who eventually knocked on my door and stepped in to stand by my side wasn't just some sweet old man who liked to tend to his rose bushes and collect rent checks. He was the ultimate gatekeeper to a world of unimaginable wealth and influence that my family had spent their entire pathetic lives desperately trying to claw their way into. And right now, they are leaving frantic voicemails, begging for my forgiveness and demanding answers, while I sit back and watch their entire fake empire crumble to the ground. Before I tell you exactly how it all went down and how they destroyed their own lives, hit that like button if you believe karma always collects its debts. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments section below. Now, let's go back to the chapel where this nightmare really began. The walls of the chapel's waiting room were painted a soft, eggshell white, but in the dim afternoon light, they looked sterile and cold, like the walls of a hospital waiting room. I remember staring at a small, jagged crack near the ceiling, tracing its uneven path with my eyes just to keep my mind from completely fracturing. It was exactly 3:45 p.m. The ceremony was scheduled, booked, and paid for to begin at exactly 4 p.m. The air in the room felt incredibly heavy. It was thick with the scent of old cedar wood, beeswax candles, and the nervous, cold sweat gathering at the base of my neck. I was holding my phone in my right hand, gripping the metal edges so tightly that my knuckles had turned completely white. The screen was black. I pressed the power button again, hoping the screen would illuminate with a barrage of apologies, of missed calls, of my father frantically explaining that they were stuck in traffic and would be there any second. Nothing. I pulled up my recent calls list. I had dialed my mother, Eleanor, 4 separate times. I had dialed my father, Richard, 6 times. I had even swallowed my pride and called my brother, Arthur, twice. Every single call had gone straight to voicemail. I sat down heavily on a plush velvet chair in the corner of the room. It felt entirely too comfortable for the harsh, brutal reality of the moment I was experiencing. My phone finally buzzed, vibrating violently against the palm of my hand. My heart jumped straight into my throat. I grabbed it, fully expecting to hear my father panting into the receiver, telling me he was sprinting from the parking lot. Instead, it was a text message from my mother. I opened it, and the words burned themselves into my retinas. "Arthur and Chloe are just about to pop the balloon. So sorry we can't make it to your little gathering, Julian. The baby needs his family around today. We will send a card in the mail." My little gathering. That was exactly how my mother referred to my wedding. She reduced the most significant commitment of my life to a trivial inconvenience. I stared at the glowing pixels on the screen until they blurred together into a meaningless shape. A second text chimed in immediately after. This one was from my Aunt Martha, my mother's sister and the family's resident enabler. "Julian, sweetie, impossible to get away. The catering here is spectacular and your mother needs me to help host the guests. Have a nice afternoon. Have a nice afternoon." She spoke to me as if I were a distant acquaintance she had bumped into at Walmart, not her nephew on his wedding day. Then came the final, devastating blow. The text from my father. The man who, just 3 days prior, had put his heavy hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eye, and sworn he wouldn't let me down. Things are really celebratory here. Sorry, son. Catch up next week. I didn't throw the phone against the wall. I didn't scream or break down crying. I just carefully, methodically placed it face up on the small wooden table beside me. The screen stayed lit for a few seconds, serving as a glowing monument to my family's absolute indifference, before finally fading to black. I walked over to the tall, antique mirror leaning against the far wall. I looked at myself. I looked at the dark navy suit I had spent months saving up for, the crisp white shirt, the silk tie my beautiful bride, Clara, had spent an hour picking out for me. I looked fine. I looked exactly like a groom. But inside, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I realized in that cold, quiet room that this was not an accident. This was not a scheduling conflict, a miscommunication, or an unfortunate misunderstanding. This was a deliberate public ratification of my complete irrelevance to them. They weren't just missing my wedding. They were making a very loud, very clear statement. They were drawing a massive line in the sand and standing firmly, arms linked on the other side. I placed my hands flat against the cool glass of the mirror, staring at my own reflection. Why was I so surprised? Why did the sting in my chest feel so fresh, so overwhelmingly painful, when this was the exact same pain I had been carrying around for 29 years? I closed my eyes, and the memories came rushing in. A massive tidal wave of every dismissed achievement, every ignored birthday, every silent Thanksgiving dinner table where my mere existence felt like an unforgivable intrusion on their perfect picture. I genuinely thought today would be different. I thought that maybe, just maybe, a wedding would be the one life event sacred enough to force them to put aside their twisted, toxic hierarchy. I thought blood would finally mean something. I was so incredibly wrong. To truly understand how a family can completely abandon their own son on his wedding day, you have to understand the sick business model of my childhood. I do not use the term business model lightly. My family did not operate like a normal, loving, supportive unit. We functioned exactly like a ruthlessly competitive, badly managed hedge fund. My mother, Eleanor, was the frantic, image-obsessed CEO. She controlled the narrative, the finances, and the emotional temperature of the house. My father, Richard, was the compliant, cowardly board member who never read the briefing materials and simply voted yes on whatever insane scheme my mother proposed to keep the peace. And then there was my older brother, Arthur. Arthur was the sole high-risk asset. He was the undisputed golden child, the blue-chip stock my mother poured every single ounce of her emotional and financial capital into, entirely at my expense. Arthur did everything right according to the unwritten, psychotic bylaws of our family. He wore the right designer clothes, went to the right country club parties, and spoke with a loud, booming, aggressive confidence that managed to convince everyone around him that he was a financial genius. He married a woman named Chloe, whose family had money. Or at least they possessed the loud, aggressive illusion of money. Arthur called himself a serial entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, a real estate mogul. He drove a pristine silver Porsche. He wore massive, gaudy watches that cost more than my entire annual salary. But I knew the absolute truth. Or at least, I suspected it because when you are the invisible child in a household, you learn to observe everything. I knew his silver Porsche was heavily leased. I knew the aggressive conversations he had on his phone during family dinners about a pending lawsuit, a massive corporate promotion, or a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition were largely staged theater meant solely for my mother's benefit. He lived in a massive, ostentatious house in a gated community where the neighborhood HOA meetings were treated like high-stakes international summit negotiations. But I knew the massive mortgage on that house was slowly burying him alive. It didn't matter, though. To my mother, Arthur was success incarnate. He was the trophy she paraded around to her friends. I, on the other hand, was the off-book venture they never understood and actively despised. I chose a completely different path. I am an architect, but not the kind that designs massive glass corporate skyscrapers for soulless firms. I specialize in historical restoration and custom, handcrafted architectural modeling. My hands are constantly stained with dark wood stain, graphite, and plaster dust. I spend my days in a sawdust-covered workshop at the back of a rented residential property, bringing forgotten, beautiful structures back to life. To me, the smell of cedar wood and old paper is the ultimate fragrance of creation. To my family, it was the reek of financial instability and social embarrassment. They saw my worn denim work shirts and my quiet, intense focus not as the uniform of a dedicated craftsman, but as a deliberate, malicious insult to their bourgeois aspirations. They could not fathom a life that wasn't benchmarked by a bloated salary, a fat 401k, or ruthless corporate ladder climbing. Every single Thanksgiving dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare and passive aggression. So, Julian, my mother would say, cutting her turkey with surgical precision, not even looking up from her plate. Still playing with little wood blocks in that dirty shed of yours? It is a historical restoration firm, Mom. We just secured a major, city-funded contract for the Downtown Heritage District. I would reply, trying desperately to keep my voice even and respectful. Arthur would chuckle from across the table, swirling his expensive red wine in his glass. Cute. Let me know when you want to get into commercial real estate, little brother. I can show you how the big boys actually play the game. You can't rely on an inheritance to bail you out forever, especially since Mom and Dad are investing in my new startup. The sheer audacity of that statement always made my blood boil. I didn't even have a college fund because my parents had completely drained it to bail Arthur out of a spectacularly failed crypto venture when he was 22 years old. But I stayed quiet. I gripped my fork and looked at my plate. I learned early on that defending myself with facts only fueled their fire and turned me into the villain. The real breaking point, the absolute catalyst for the ultimate betrayal that led to my empty wedding, happened the night I brought Clara home. Clara is a high school music teacher. She has kind, empathetic eyes, a gentle laugh, and a beautiful soul that sees right through the superficial garbage of the world. She saw my calloused, stained hands and didn't see a financial failure. She saw a builder. She saw a man who created things with integrity. I invited my family to a very nice, very expensive downtown restaurant to formally announce our engagement. I had saved up for 10 months to buy Clara the ring she deserved. When the dessert arrived, I stood up, took Clara's hand in mine, and told them the incredible news. We were getting married. I expected a little warmth, maybe a hug, maybe a simple congratulations. Instead, a suffocating silence fell over the table, followed by a collective, mournful sigh from my mother and aunt. My mother deployed her signature look of deeply pained disappointment, a facial expression she had perfected over years of dealing with my minor rebellions. She set her silver fork down slowly on her plate. Julian, dear, she lamented, her voice dripping with thick, artificial sympathy that made my stomach churn. It is lovely that you've found someone who shares your artistic inclinations. But a marriage requires a real foundation, a real salary. You cannot frame love and use it to pay off a mortgage on a house you clearly cannot afford. Aunt Martha, who had tagged along just to be a spectator to my misery, leaned in and whispered loud enough for the entire restaurant section to hear. It is just such a difficult world without a proper safety net. I just worry about the inevitable custody issues if they end up in a messy divorce in a few years because of financial strain. I gripped my cloth napkin under the table until my knuckles ached. I looked over at Clara. Her beautiful smile hadn't wavered, but I saw the distinct flash of deep hurt in her eyes. Arthur didn't even bother to look up from his smartphone. He just muttered, "Congrats, kid. Try not to go bankrupt on the catering. I know a guy who does cheap buffet spreads if you need a discount." We left the dinner early. I paid the massive bill, escorted Clara to my truck, and drove away. I apologized to her the entire drive home, feeling a deep, burning, toxic shame that these were the people I was tied to by blood. But Clara just held my hand, kissed my knuckles, and told me that we were building our own family now. A real family based on love, not bank accounts. I believed her. I truly thought the worst of their cruelty was behind us. I thought that by simply keeping my head down, asking for nothing, and planning a modest, quiet wedding, we could avoid the drama. I had absolutely no idea that Arthur had already set the trap, and my family was more than eager to step right into it and destroy me. The storm did not hit all at once. It gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening, completely disguised as a joyous, celebratory family announcement. Clara and I had officially set our wedding date for the second Saturday in October. It was a beautiful time of year in our state, the leaves turning brilliant shades of orange and red, and we had booked a charming, ivy-covered chapel just outside the city limits. Save the dates had been meticulously addressed and mailed out 6 months in advance. Every single person in the family knew the plan. The date was locked in stone. For months before the wedding, my parents hosted a massive summer barbecue at their sprawling suburban home. Clara and I were sitting quietly on the back patio, sipping lemonade and trying to stay out of the way, when Arthur loudly clinked his glass with a metal spoon to get everyone's attention. He stood up, puffed out his chest, and wrapped a possessive arm around Chloe, who was 4 months pregnant with their first child. "Everyone, listen up. May I have your attention?" Arthur boomed, grinning like he had just personally conquered a small, wealthy nation. "Chloe and I are absolutely thrilled to formally announce that we are hosting the ultimate blowout baby shower and gender reveal party. We are talking fully catered food stations, a live band, a champagne fountain, the works. I want everyone to mark your calendars right now for the second Saturday in October." The patio went completely, terrifyingly silent. The sound of the grill sizzling in the background suddenly seemed deafening. Clara stiffened next to me, her hand gripping my knee. I felt the blood rush entirely from my face, leaving me cold and lightheaded. I looked directly at Arthur. He was staring right back at me, a smug, highly challenging, predatory glint in his eye. This was not an oversight. This was not a mistake. This was a calculated, tactical masterstroke of social warfare. It was a vicious loyalty test, presented to the entire family as a joyous coincidence. He wanted to see who they would choose. "Arthur," I said, my voice dangerously low, cutting through the silence. "That is our wedding day. You know that. We sent the cards out 2 months ago. You have our save the date on your refrigerator." Arthur waved his hand dismissively in the air, a gesture of supreme arrogance. "Oh, come on, Jules. Don't be so dramatic. We are doing our party starting at noon. Your little thing isn't until 4 in the afternoon. People can easily do both. Besides, the luxury venue Chloe wanted for the shower only had that specific Saturday available. You cannot seriously ask my pregnant wife to compromise her dream gender reveal just because you're sensitive." My mother immediately jumped into the fray, her toxic maternal instincts activating exclusively to protect her golden child. "Julian, please do not start a scene today. Your brother is bringing a child into this world. The very first grandchild of this family. It is a monumental occasion. You and Clara are just doing a small, simple, low-budget ceremony anyway. You can adjust your timeline." "Adjust?" I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the stone patio, the sound echoing loudly. "We have vendors booked. We have a non-refundable venue. We are getting married. I am not moving my wedding day because Arthur wants to shoot blue or pink smoke out of a rented cannon. Do not raise your voice at your mother in my house," my father barked, suddenly finding his spine now that he had a script provided by his wife to follow. The argument escalated into a brutal, humiliating shouting match in front of 20 guests. Threats of officially cutting me out of the family trust, which I knew for a fact was empty anyway, were thrown around by my mother as if she were wielding a weapon. My mother openly accused Clara of being manipulative and trying to drive a wedge between 2 brothers. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed Clara's hand, turned my back on them, and we walked out of the yard without looking back. Over the next few months, the psychological pressure campaign began in full force. Aunt Martha called me almost daily, acting as the designated emotional manipulator for my mother. "Julian, you are literally breaking your poor mother's heart. Why do you have to be so incredibly stubborn? It is just a date on a calendar. Arthur is under a lot of stress with his commercial real estate business. Just be the bigger person and move the wedding to Sunday." I steadfastly refused. For the first time in my entire life, I planted my feet firmly in the dirt and refused to be moved to the back of the line. I thought that if I held my ground, if I showed them that this meant everything to me, they would eventually realize how insane and cruel they were being. Surely, a son's wedding trumped a party with balloons. I was wrong. The cruelty was the point. 2 weeks before the wedding, my father pulled me aside during a brief, incredibly awkward visit to my workshop. He looked deeply uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his expensive loafers kicking at the sawdust on the floor. "Listen, son," he muttered, completely avoiding eye contact with me. "Your mother is, well, you know how she gets. She has dug her heels in. She's staying at Arthur's party all day to help host the VIP guests. But I want you to know I will be there. I promise to be your best man, and I won't let you down. I will just slip away from the shower around 2:30, head straight to the chapel and stand by your side." It was a pathetic, cowardly half-measure of a promise, but in my starved, desperate state for paternal validation, I took it. "Thank you, Dad," I said, genuinely believing him. But Arthur wasn't done. He couldn't just win the loyalty of my parents. He had to ensure my absolute, total isolation. 3 days before the wedding, I got a phone call from Mark. Mark had been my best friend since the 10th grade. We had played baseball together, gone to prom together. When my dad had initially waffled on being my best man months ago, I had asked Mark to be a groomsman, to stand up there with me and hold the rings. "Hey, Julian," Mark said, his voice incredibly tight, completely lacking its usual easygoing, brotherly warmth. "Listen, man, I can't make it this Saturday." I froze, the sanding block slipping from my hand. "What? Mark, you're one of my groomsmen. The wedding is in 3 days. Are you okay? Is it a family emergency?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the line. I could hear city traffic in the background. "It's not a medical emergency, no. It's..." Arthur called me. My stomach plummeted straight into the floorboards. "Arthur? What the hell does Arthur have to do with you? He offered me a buy-in on that massive new commercial real estate project he's developing downtown." Mark rushed out, the words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to outrun his own guilt. "It is a ground-floor opportunity, Julian. Life-changing money. But he's hosting a mandatory exclusive investor lunch at his house. During the baby shower, he explicitly said if I am not there in person to sign the legal papers, he gives the spot to someone else." I felt the room spin violently. Arthur was literally buying my friends. He was aggressively weaponizing his fake wealth to dismantle the most important day of my life, piece by piece. "So you are actively choosing a real estate pitch over my wedding," I said, my voice completely void of any emotion. "Julian, come on, man. Be reasonable. I have massive student loans. I am desperately trying to buy a house. You know how hard the economy is out here. I will make it up to you, I swear to God. I will buy you guys a great steak dinner next week." "Don't bother," I said, and hung up the phone. I sat completely alone in my workshop as the sun went down, surrounded by the beautiful wooden models of houses I was building for other people, realizing with crushing clarity that I had no home of my own. My family had sold me out for a baby shower. My best friend of over a decade had sold me out for a phantom real estate investment. I was entirely, fundamentally alone in the world. But as I sat in the dark, smelling the cedar wood, a cold, hard, unbreakable resolve began to form deep in my chest. I wasn't going to cancel. I wasn't going to let them win. I was going to marry Clara if I had to stand at that altar by myself and speak my vows to an empty room. I thought the betrayal had peaked. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The morning of the wedding broke with a harsh, glaring sunlight that felt almost mocking in its brilliant intensity. I woke up in the small, modest apartment I shared with Clara. She was already awake, sitting quietly at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of black coffee. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering, protective love that took my breath away. "We are doing this," she said softly, but with a titanium core of absolute certainty. Just you and me against the world. I nodded, swallowing the massive lump of dread anchored in my throat. I opened my phone, a masochistic habit I couldn't seem to break no matter how much pain it caused me. Social media was already a flooded war zone. Arthur had hired a professional, high-end photography team for the baby shower. My feed was jammed with videos of professional caterers setting up massive floral arches, intricate ice sculptures being wheeled across the lawn, and my mother, dressed in a custom designer pantsuit, directing traffic like a four-star general preparing for battle. It didn't look like a baby shower. It looked like a royal coronation. There was not a single post, not a single text message, not a single passing mention of my wedding from anyone in my bloodline. I threw the phone aggressively onto the bed and went into the bathroom to shower. I scrubbed my skin under the scalding hot water until it was bright red, desperately trying to wash off the invisible stench of my family's toxicity. I stepped out, dried off, and put on my suit. I tied my shoes with deliberate, methodical movements. I drove Clara to the chapel, holding her hand so tightly the entire way that my knuckles ached. We arrived at the beautiful, rustic venue 2 hours early. Clara went to the bridal suite with her 2 friends from the school who were serving as her bridesmaids. I retreated to the small, cold waiting room at the back of the chapel. That was exactly when the final text started rolling in. The final, brutal nails hammered into the coffin of my family ties. The very last shred of hope I had was clinging desperately to Kevin, my older cousin, who had always been somewhat decent to me growing up. My phone buzzed on the table. "Hey Jules," Kevin's text read. "Listen, things are absolutely crazy over here. Arthur rented a whole carnival setup. Your dad tried to leave about 20 minutes ago to head to your venue, but your mom threw a massive, screaming fit in front of all the guests. She explicitly said if he left the shower early, she would file for a divorce on Monday morning, hire the best lawyer in the city, and take the house and his entire pension. He's terrified. He's staying. I'm so sorry, man. I'm stuck here too." That was the exact moment I looked in the mirror, the moment I realized the absolute, undeniable finality of my isolation. The moment my father texted me his pathetic, cowardly excuse about things being celebratory. My mother had weaponized divorce and legal action to keep my father from standing by my side. I was staring blankly at the floorboards, listening to the muffled, beautiful sounds of the string quartet warming up their instruments in the main sanctuary. I was a groom without a family. I had no best man. I had no one to stand behind me and signify that I belonged to a tribe. I was an orphan with living parents. Then, there was a soft, polite, incredibly distinct knock on the heavy oak door. I didn't answer right away. I assumed it was the venue coordinator coming to deliver the humiliating news that it was time to take my solitary, pathetic walk down the aisle to the altar. The door clicked open slowly. Standing in the doorway was Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison was the owner of the property where I rented my architectural workshop and the small cottage Clara and I lived in. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his late 60s. Most days, I saw him out in the yard, wearing worn-out gardening gloves and a faded straw hat, pruning his hydrangeas or quietly repairing a broken fence post. He drove an old, beat-up Volvo station wagon and always spoke with a slow, deliberate, incredibly polite cadence. He paid attention to detail, never bothered us, and occasionally left baskets of fresh tomatoes from his garden on our porch. But today, standing in the doorway of the chapel, Mr. Harrison was not wearing gardening clothes. He was wearing a bespoke, midnight blue suit that fit his frame with razor-sharp, custom-tailored precision. The fabric looked incredibly expensive. His silver hair was perfectly combed. He looked immaculate. He looked powerful. He looked like a man who commanded entire boardrooms. He stepped into the room, holding a small, elegantly wrapped box tied with a silk ribbon. He paused, his sharp, incredibly perceptive eyes taking in the entire room in a fraction of a second. He looked at the empty chairs. He looked at my phone, still displaying the litany of rejected calls and pathetic text messages. He was a man deeply accustomed to observing the world without commenting on it, and his intelligent eyes missed absolutely nothing. He looked directly at my solitary figure, standing rigid and defeated in the center of the room. "Julian," he said, his voice deep, resonant, and imbued with a gentle, undeniable authority that commanded immediate respect. "I brought a small token of my appreciation for you and Clara on your special day. But it appears I have interrupted a rather quiet room." I couldn't speak. My throat was completely locked. The profound humiliation of being caught in my absolute abandonment by my landlord was choking the air out of my lungs. I just nodded, unable to form words. Mr. Harrison walked gracefully over to the table and set the gift down next to my phone. He turned to me, his gaze incredibly steady and unflinching. "A man should never, under any circumstances, stand alone on the day he pledges his life to the woman he loves," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "It is a day for witnesses. It is a day for strength." He reached out and expertly adjusted my crooked tie, flattening the silk against my chest. His hands were firm and steady. "I know I am merely the man who collects your rent on the first of the month," Mr. Harrison continued, his tone shifting into something profoundly formal and deeply respectful. "But I have watched you work in that shop, Julian. I have seen the intense integrity in your craft. I have seen the way you treat Clara with absolute reverence. You are a man of immense character and value." He took a step back and met my eyes, holding my gaze. "It would be my profound absolute honor, if you would permit me, to stand beside you today. To be your best man." The air in the room seemed to violently shift. The crushing, suffocating weight of my family's betrayal didn't vanish, but it was suddenly and powerfully counterbalanced by the sheer, unadulterated decency of a man who owed me absolutely nothing. The father who shared my DNA, the man who was supposed to protect me, had abandoned me because he was threatened with a divorce lawyer over a party trick. The man who owned my workshop was stepping up in a bespoke suit to ensure I didn't face my future alone. I felt a hot, burning tear track down my face, the very first one I had allowed myself to shed all day. I quickly wiped it away with the back of my hand. "I would be honored, Mr. Harrison," I managed to say, my voice cracking under the weight of the emotion. He smiled, a small, knowing, incredibly warm smile. "Call me William." William clapped a firm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. The string quartet outside began to play the opening notes of the processional march. The heavy oak doors to the sanctuary were waiting to be opened. "Shall we go show them the kind of man you are?" William asked. I took a massive, deep breath, the cold resolve settling permanently into my bones, turning my spine into steel. I was done waiting for my family. I was done hoping for a seat at their miserable, toxic table. "Yes," I said. I pushed the heavy doors open, stepping out of the shadows of the waiting room and into the blinding, beautiful light of the chapel, completely unaware that the quiet, gardening old man walking proudly beside me was about to hand me the keys to a kingdom that would shatter my family's pathetic delusions of grandeur forever. The heavy, centuries-old oak doors of the chapel swung open, and for the very first time that entire, excruciating day, I finally took a full, deep breath that reached the bottom of my lungs. The sanctuary was not packed to the rafters. There were maybe 30 people sitting quietly in the polished wooden pews. These were Clara's fellow public school teachers, a few of my most loyal, long-term clients, the local lumber yard vendors who knew the quality of my work, and a handful of genuine friends who had chosen to be there for us. There was no designated family section for me. The first 3 rows on my side of the aisle were completely, devastatingly empty. There were no aunts dabbing their eyes with tissues, no uncles checking their watches, and absolutely no parents looking on with pride. But as I walked down that long, carpeted aisle with William Harrison keeping a steady, dignified pace right beside me, his bespoke suit cutting a sharp figure against the stained glass light, the emptiness of those front rows stopped feeling like a cruel, unusual punishment. Instead, it started feeling like a massive, overwhelming relief. I was walking away from 29 years of constant criticism, endless comparisons, and the toxic reality of being the invisible son. Clara looked like an absolute vision. When she stepped into the doorway at the back of the chapel, the afternoon sunlight caught the delicate lace of her dress, and my heart completely stopped. She didn't look nervously at the empty space where my parents should have been standing. She didn't offer me a look of pity. She looked right directly at me, her eyes shining with a fierce, protective, unconditional love that made my brother's entire fake real estate empire look like a pile of cheap plastic blocks. We stood at the altar and said our vows. We didn't just promise to stay together through standard sickness and health. We looked into each other's eyes and silently promised to fiercely protect our home from the people who were supposed to love us the most. When the minister formally asked for the rings, William stepped forward with absolute grace. He handed me the gold band with a firm, respectful nod that communicated more paternal pride than my own father had managed in 3 decades. It was, without a single doubt, the most dignified, profoundly beautiful moment of my entire life. After the ceremony concluded, we hosted a very small, intimate reception at a local, family-owned farm-to-table restaurant downtown. There were no ostentatious champagne fountains. There were no rented ice sculptures melting on the buffet tables, no professional string quartets, and no carnival games designed to distract people from a lack of genuine connection. It was just incredibly good food, warm, amber string lights hung across the exposed brick walls, and people who actually, truly wanted to be in that room with us. I was sitting at the head table, holding my new wife's hand under the linen tablecloth, feeling a strange, quiet, unfamiliar peace finally settle over my shoulders, when William Harrison approached us. He had a simple glass of sparkling water with lime in his hand and a very thoughtful, focused expression on his distinguished face. "Julian, Clara," William said, his voice a low, comforting rumble as he pulled up a heavy wooden chair across from us. "I happened to overhear one of your lovely bridesmaids mentioning in passing that a honeymoon was not in the immediate plans for the two of you. Is that information correct?" I felt a brief, hot flush of embarrassment hit my cheeks, a leftover reflex from years of my family mocking my financial status, but I forced myself to keep my head held high. "Yes, William, that is correct," I answered honestly. "We poured all of our available savings into paying for the wedding venue and securing the commercial lease for my new, much larger architectural workshop on the south side of town. We decided that business promotion, maintaining a stable salary, and expanding the firm's capabilities was the absolute priority right now. We will take a nice trip somewhere next year when the cash flow is a bit stronger." William nodded slowly, his incredibly sharp, observant eyes taking in the reality of our pragmatic situation. "Pragmatism and financial discipline are highly valuable traits, Julian. They are the bedrock of any lasting enterprise. But a marriage begins with a celebration of unity, a designated time to step away from the grind, not just the execution of a business plan. Excuse me for one brief moment." He stood up smoothly, pulled a sleek, encrypted smartphone from the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket, and walked out the heavy glass doors to the quiet outdoor patio. I watched him through the glass. He made a single phone call. He didn't pace nervously. He didn't wave his hands. He spoke for less than 3 minutes, standing perfectly still, speaking with the easy, familiar, unbothered cadence of a man who moved mountains and dictated market trends before he even had his morning coffee. He ended the call, slid the phone seamlessly back into his pocket, and walked back to our table. A distinct, highly dangerous twinkle of genuine amusement danced in his pale blue eyes. "I have an old business associate," William began, sitting back down and resting his hands on the table. "His name is Victor Sterling. Perhaps, given your line of work, you are familiar with him." I felt my jaw physically drop, the name hitting me like a freight train. Victor Sterling was a notoriously private billionaire, an international philanthropist, and a massive titan in the global real estate market. But much more importantly, he was the anonymous, high-net-worth client I had been secretly doing grueling contract work for over the past 8 consecutive months. I had been commissioned through a completely blind, heavily NDA-protected third-party agency to painstakingly design and build the historically accurate, massive architectural models for the complete structural restoration of his family's sprawling ancestral estate in the Scottish Highlands. I had done the excruciatingly detailed work for a fraction of my normal hourly salary rate simply because the rich historical significance of the massive project captivated my artistic soul entirely. I had spent countless late nights in my sawdust-covered shed, studying centuries-old blueprints, treating his family's complex history with the exact same reverence, meticulous care, and deep respect that my own family had violently denied me my entire life. I know the name, yes, I stammered, completely and utterly caught off guard. I just finished a massive restoration model for his estate last month. I am well aware, William said smoothly, taking a calm sip of his water. Victor and I served on a rather tedious, highly stressful corporate banking board together a lifetime ago. We have remained close confidants ever since. I just informed him over the phone that the brilliant, incredibly dedicated young architect who breathed life back into his grandfather's legacy was getting married today, entirely without the support or presence of his own family. Victor was profoundly moved by your situation. He absolutely despises disloyalty, and he deeply, fundamentally respects hard work and blue-collar integrity. William leaned in closer over the table, his voice dropping to a quiet, intensely authoritative register that commanded absolute attention. Victor currently has a private, fully staffed, custom-built sailing megayacht docked at the elite coastal marina, roughly 3 hours from here. He insists, in the strongest possible legal and personal terms, that you and Clara make use of it for the next 14 days as his personal wedding gift to you both. The veteran captain and the entire hospitality crew are on standby, waiting for your arrival tomorrow morning. Your honeymoon is completely, comprehensively handled. Clara gasped out loud, her hands flying up to cover her mouth, tears instantly springing to her eyes. I sat there in my rented tuxedo, completely paralyzed by the sheer, incomprehensible magnitude of the offer. My family had appraised my worth as a human being based entirely on the plaster dust on my jeans and my lack of a corporate title. They saw a quiet man in a sawdust-covered studio and assumed his world was small, pathetic, and irrelevant. They completely and utterly failed to realize that the exact same quiet man was held in incredibly high esteem by people whose worlds were so vast, so powerful. They made Arthur's gated suburban neighborhood look like a cheap plastic terrarium sitting on a Walmart shelf. William, we cannot possibly accept something of that financial magnitude, I said, my voice barely a raspy whisper, my brain struggling to process the math. That is far too much. That's life-changing money just for a vacation. Nonsense, William replied firmly, waving his hand to dismiss my protest. In the actual world of real, generational wealth, Julian, genuine talent, and absolute, unshakable integrity are the only true currencies that matter. You possess both in spades. Consider it an early inheritance from the universe, a dividend paid on your hard work. Do not insult Victor Sterling's immense generosity by refusing. Go home tonight and pack your bags. The very next morning, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Clara and I drove our beat-up truck to the coast. We completely bypassed the crowded public docks filled with tourists and pulled up to the heavy steel gates of a highly secured, private, members-only marina. Waiting for us at the end of the longest pier was a vessel so sleek, so massive, and so impossibly elegant. It looked like it had been carved entirely out of moonlight, titanium, and polished glass. The captain, a distinguished, broad-shouldered man in a crisp white naval uniform, greeted us formally by name at the base of the boarding ramp. He shook my hand, addressing me with a level of profound, genuine respect I had never once received from my own father in 29 years. We were escorted onto the gleaming teak deck, our modest luggage handled by the staff. A steward in a pristine vest immediately handed us chilled flutes of incredibly rare vintage champagne. I stood at the polished mahogany railing with my beautiful wife, feeling the warm, salty sea breeze wash over us as the massive yacht's powerful engines hummed to life. We smoothly detached from the dock, leaving the shore behind, and headed directly toward the deep, impossible, endless blue of the open ocean. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my smartphone. It had been dead silent since the barrage of cruel texts the day before. My family was likely still severely hungover from Arthur's grotesque baby shower, sitting around my parents' kitchen island, patting themselves on the back for finally putting me in my place, completely convinced I was currently sitting in my dingy apartment, crying over their absence. I opened the camera application. I didn't take a tacky, boastful picture of the yacht's gold-plated name or the uniformed crew. I didn't take a selfie. I just took a simple, beautifully framed, highly evocative photograph of Clara's hand resting gently in mine, our new gold wedding bands catching the brilliant morning sunlight. In the background, stretching out perfectly behind our joined hands, was the endless, luxurious expanse of the ocean. You could see just the very edge of the polished mahogany railing and the crystal stems of the champagne flutes resting on a teak table. It reeked of quiet, untouchable, astronomical money. I opened my Instagram feed. I selected the photo. I didn't write a long, bitter, emotionally unhinged paragraph about family betrayal or abandonment. I didn't tag a single one of them. The caption was a simple, declarative statement of absolute, undeniable freedom. The adventure begins. I hit the blue post button. I didn't do it as an act of petty, childish revenge. I did it as a formal, highly public declaration of independence. My old life, where I was forced at gunpoint to play the pathetic supporting role to my brother's psychotic delusions of grandeur, was officially over. My new life, where I was the lead architect of my own destiny, had just beautifully begun. I set the phone face down on the cushioned, sun-drenched lounge chair and turned my full attention back to my wife. Exactly 15 minutes later, the black screen lit up with a blinding flash. Then the phone vibrated violently against the wood. Then it started ringing. And it did not stop ringing for the next 3 entire days. For the first 72 hours of our breathtaking honeymoon, my smartphone was transformed from a communication device into a frantic, glowing, buzzing artifact of my family's spectacular, self-inflicted folly. Every single time I walked past the shaded lounge chair where I had deliberately left it sitting face up, the screen was illuminated with a brand new, increasingly desperate attempt to breach my boundaries. The notifications piled up on the lock screen like mounting casualties in a desperate social war they didn't even realize they had already decisively lost. In total, over those 3 days, there were exactly 417 missed calls, frantic text messages, and unhinged voicemails. I want to be incredibly clear about something. They weren't desperately reaching out because they suddenly woke up, looked in the mirror, and felt a deep, agonizing, soul-crushing remorse for abandoning their own flesh and blood at the altar. They were reaching out because that single, carefully framed photograph I posted violently violated the fundamental, unwritten laws of their carefully constructed social physics. They were looking at an image of a superyacht that cost more to fuel for a single week than my brother Arthur made in 3 entire years of his fake real estate hustle, and their materialistic brains were completely, literally short-circuiting. They needed to force this new, terrifying information into a narrative they could financially control. They desperately needed me to be a massive fraud, or they needed to somehow incredibly claim credit for my sudden, inexplicable proximity to extreme wealth. Clara and I made a hilarious, highly satisfying game out of completely ignoring the relentless buzzing. We swam in crystal clear, secluded coves off the coast. We ate incredible, multi-course meals prepared exclusively for us by a private, Michelin-trained chef, and we slept deeply without the crushing, suffocating weight of my family's toxic expectations resting on our chests. On the warm, breezy afternoon of the 3rd day, while we were anchored off a stunning, entirely secluded private island, I finally decided it was time to drop the guillotine. I walked over and picked up the phone. I calmly bypassed the hundreds of aggressive texts from Aunt Martha demanding I explain myself immediately. I completely ignored Arthur's commanding, furious messages telling me to call him the second I saw his text because he had a business proposition for me. I sat down, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and waited for the screen to light up with the inevitable incoming call from my mother, Eleanor. It only took 4 minutes. I let it ring. I let it ring until the absolute last possible second before it hit voicemail, reclaiming every single ounce of control and power I had surrendered to her over the past 29 years. Then, with a calm flick of my thumb, I swiped to answer. I didn't say a single word. I didn't say hello. I just held the sleek phone to my ear, leaning back, and let the vast, empty, powerful sound of the ocean wind fill the cellular connection. Julian? Julian, is that you? My mother's voice was sharp, incredibly breathless, and laced with a highly manufactured, theatrical panic that was genuinely breathtaking in its utter dishonesty. Julian, for the love of God, answer me. Where are you? Your father and I have been absolutely beside ourselves with worry. You completely disappeared after the wedding. I leaned back further into the plush cushions of my lounge chair, watching a small pod of dolphins break the glittering surface of the water in the far distance. The performance she was putting on was almost admirable in its audacity. They weren't worried about my safety. They were completely mystified. They were outraged that I had slipped off their heavily monitored radar and somehow landed somewhere they couldn't even afford to buy a ticket to look at. I am on my honeymoon, Mother, I said. My voice was completely placid, as steady and unbothered as the horizon line in front of me. I sounded exactly like a man who owned the entire ocean. I heard a frantic, panicked shuffling on the other end of the line. I could hear my brother Arthur in the background, hovering over the speakerphone, his voice a sharp, impatient, highly aggressive hiss. Ask him where the hell he got the damn boat, Mom. Ask him whose money is paying for that. He doesn't have that kind of cash. It's a rental scam. My mother's tone pivoted instantly, dropping the fake, breathless maternal concern and shifting straight into a pointed, aggressive, demanding cross-examination. She couldn't help herself. The sheer, unadulterated greed always overpowered the act. A honeymoon, Julian? On a vessel of that ridiculous magnitude? Your brother saw the pictures you posted. We are all quite perplexed here at the house. Did Clara's family have hidden financial resources you maliciously failed to mention to us? Or did you take out a massive, highly irresponsible personal loan just to show off? It would have been helpful to know your actual financial standing before the wedding, so we could have planned accordingly. There it was, the absolute, undeniable truth of who they were. The frantic, pathetic scrabbling for a logical foothold. They desperately needed an explanation that would keep their neatly constructed, Arthur-centric universe from violently flying apart into a million pieces. They needed me to be financially reckless, playing at being a bohemian rich kid, because the alternative was a massive existential threat to their entire identity. The alternative was that they had made a colossal, unforgivable, life-ruining error in judgment based entirely on their own superficial, trashy criteria. This was the exact, perfect conversational endgame I had been unknowingly preparing for my entire life. I was not going to yell. I was not going to defend my worth or my career. I was not going to justify my existence to them ever again. I was simply going to drop the massive, crushing anvil of reality directly onto the roof of their fragile, fake glass house. No, Mother, I said, letting the simple, ice-cold denial expand in the heavy silence between us. I did not take out a bank loan, and Clara's family consists of hard-working public school teachers who live on a strict salary. There is no secret college fund, no hidden inheritance, and no massive trust account paying for this. Then explain the yacht, Julian, she demanded, her voice actually cracking with sheer, unadulterated frustration and envy. You build little wooden models in a rented, dirty shed. You don't vacation on billionaire superyachts in the middle of the ocean. Actually, Mom, I do, I replied, my voice deliberately light, conversational, and utterly, brutally ruthless. The yacht we are currently sailing on belongs to a gentleman named Victor Sterling. I am absolutely sure Arthur recognizes the name from his little commercial real estate magazines he leaves on your coffee table. Victor is one of my private, exclusive clients. He was so profoundly moved by the way my architectural firm brought his family's history to life that he offered this entire trip, fully staffed with a private chef and captain, as a personal wedding present to Clara and me. The silence on the other end of the line was so incredibly profound, so physically thick. I could almost hear the rusted, overworked gears of her materialistic mind completely seizing up and smoking out of her ears. Victor. Victor Sterling? She finally choked out. The name alone carried a massive, undeniable weight in her circles that she couldn't possibly argue with or diminish. But how? How in the world do you know people like that? You don't go to the country club. You don't network at the charity galas. You wear jeans. I work, mother. I do excellent, highly specialized work with absolute integrity. And it turns out those specific qualities are their own form of highly valuable currency among people who actually matter in this world, I said smoothly, enjoying every single second of her confusion. But the absolute best part of this entire situation is exactly how it was arranged. Victor was contacted directly by his close, personal friend, who happens to be my landlord, Mr. William Harrison. The sound my mother made was a faint, highly strained, strangled noise, exactly like a cheap tire slowly deflating on the side of the highway. Mr. Harrison? The old man who gardens outside your shop? The one who owns your little rental cottage? The very same, I confirmed, twisting the metaphorical knife with absolute surgical precision. The quiet, incredibly polite man you all completely dismissed as a functional part of the background scenery. The man Arthur loudly made fun of for driving an old, beat-up Volvo station wagon. It turns out William is a retired, elite wealth advisor and a highly connected broker for the top 1%. But much more importantly than his bank account, he is the man who graciously stepped in, put on a bespoke suit, and walked me down the aisle to serve as my best man when my own father was completely paralyzed by your threat of hiring a lawyer and filing for divorce. I paused, letting the absolute, crushing devastation of that undeniable fact settle heavily over her. I wanted her to feel the exact weight of what she had thrown away. It is remarkable, isn't it, mother? I continued, my voice hardening into solid, unbreakable steel. When you consistently treat people with basic human decency and respect, regardless of their perceived net worth, their job title, or the car they drive, they tend to remember it. They tend to reward it. You, Arthur, and Dad should really try it sometime. It pays substantially better than leasing a silver Porsche just to impress your neighbors. I could hear Arthur completely, totally losing his mind in the background. His voice was no longer a hiss, but a full-blown, frantic, unhinged squawk of pure indignation and panic. This is a setup. She planned this. He did this deliberately to make us look bad. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Mom. He's lying to you. Hang up the phone. I smiled. A real, genuine, deeply satisfying smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I have to go now, Mother, I said, my voice completely devoid of any lingering familial affection or obligation. The private chef just finished preparing our fresh lobster lunch on the aft deck, and I really don't want it to get cold while I sit here and listen to Arthur have a temper tantrum because he's broke. Please do not call this number again. I will not be answering. Julian, wait. Don't you dare hang up this. I pulled the phone away from my ear, hit the bright red button, and permanently disconnected the call. I didn't hesitate for a single second. I immediately went into my phone settings and blocked her phone number. Then I blocked Arthur's number. Then I blocked my father. Then I blocked Aunt Martha. I cut the final toxic threads of my family tree with a clean, immensely satisfying snip. I tossed the phone onto the teak table, walked over to my beautiful wife, and finally, truly started living my life. I honestly wish I could sit here and tell you that my family immediately saw the massive error of their ways, sought out intense psychological therapy, and we all beautifully reconciled over a tearful Thanksgiving dinner a year later. But this is the real world, and massive narcissists do not magically change their stripes. They simply run out of viable victims to exploit. I instituted a strict, impenetrable, absolutely non-negotiable no-contact policy the exact moment we returned from our honeymoon. I didn't send a letter announcing it. I simply enforced it with brutal efficiency. Any holiday mail or guilt-tripping cards they sent were immediately marked "Return to Sender." If they showed up unannounced at my old workshop, they found it completely empty with a "For Rent" sign in the window. thanks to the massive, undeniable boost in reputation from successfully completing the Victor Sterling estate project, and William Harrison quietly but firmly vouching for my absolute character and work ethic in elite, high society circles, my architectural firm completely exploded. We couldn't keep up with the incoming contracts. Within 2 short years, I officially moved out of the rented shed and purchased a massive, beautiful commercial warehouse right in the downtown arts district, converting it into a state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar design studio. Clara and I bought a stunning, historic home in a quiet, heavily wooded neighborhood with excellent public schools. We didn't need to fake our success on social media. We were quietly, securely, and happily living it every single day. While my foundation was rapidly turning into solid, unshakable bedrock, Arthur's pathetic house of cards finally, spectacularly, and very publicly caught fire. It started slowly, with quiet rumors and hushed, predictable whispers filtering through the grapevine of our old high school acquaintances. Then, the whispers turned into loud shouting, and it became highly publicized public record. Arthur's grand, supposedly incredibly successful commercial real estate startup was exposed as absolutely nothing but a highly leveraged, utterly illegal Ponzi scheme built entirely on toxic debt and entirely fraudulent financial projections. He had been desperately borrowing massive amounts of money from new, gullible investors just to pay off the angry old ones, using the leftover cash to fund his lavish, fake lifestyle, pay the massive mortgage, and keep up the wealthy appearances for our deeply delusional mother. The ultimate collapse of his empire was brutal, incredibly swift, and completely humiliating. The leased silver Porsche, the absolute crown jewel of his fake persona, was aggressively repossessed by the bank right out of his pristine driveway in the middle of a sunny Tuesday afternoon. It happened right in front of the neighborhood HOA president and half the street. The fallout was catastrophic. A massive, multi-million-dollar lawsuit was immediately filed by a group of furious, ruined investors. That specific group unfortunately included my former best friend, Mark, who lost every single penny of his savings and his chance to buy a house trying to eagerly chase Arthur's fake gold rush instead of attending my wedding. Mark tried desperately to reach out to me via email to apologize, to tell me I was right all along, to beg for a job at my firm, but I immediately deleted his messages without reading them. He made his choice at the baby shower. Chloe, realizing with terrifying clarity that the money was entirely gone and the criminal legal bills were piling up fast enough to bankrupt her own family, filed for a highly aggressive, incredibly nasty divorce. She took their young child, packed her designer bags, moved straight back in with her wealthy parents, and hired the most ruthless, expensive family lawyer in the state to secure full, uncontested custody. She cited Arthur's fraudulent business practices, his mounting legal troubles, and his increasingly erratic, desperate behavior as a clear and present danger to the child's environment. But the absolute worst casualty of the blast radius was my parents. My mother and father, who had proudly and arrogantly dumped their entire life savings, their 401k, and the money that should have been my college fund into Arthur's sinking ship just to prove their ultimate loyalty to the golden child, lost absolutely everything. Their bank accounts were drained. Their credit was destroyed. They were utterly, completely ruined. The golden child they had worshipped had bankrupted the entire family, both morally and financially, in less than 30 months. Exactly 2 years and 3 months after my wedding day, the completely inevitable happened. I was standing in the bright, sunlit lobby of my downtown studio, reviewing a set of massive blueprints with my lead contractor, when the front security buzzer rang loudly. I looked up at the high-definition security camera monitor mounted on the wall. Standing nervously on the concrete sidewalk, looking easily 10 years older, physically exhausted, and completely stripped of their usual suffocating arrogance, were my mother and father. I told my contractor to take a break. I walked slowly down the steel stairs and opened the heavy glass front door. I didn't step aside to invite them in. I just stood firmly in the doorway, my broad shoulders blocking the entrance entirely. "Julian," my mother said. Her voice was thin, incredibly frail, and trembling. She looked past my shoulder at the massive, beautiful studio behind me, the expensive laser cutting equipment, the bustling, well-paid employees. The sheer, undeniable reality of my success hit her face like a physical, heavy blow. We desperately need your help. Arthur is facing serious criminal legal trouble. The lawyer fees are astronomical, we can't afford them. We are going to lose the family house to the bank by the end of the month. We thought maybe you could offer Arthur a management job here at your firm. Just a title to show the custody judge he has a stable income. Or maybe a small personal loan, just to help us survive this. I looked at her deeply lined face. I looked at my father, who couldn't even summon the courage to meet my eyes, staring pathetically at his scuffed old shoes. They didn't come here to apologize for abandoning me at the altar. They didn't come to finally meet their daughter-in-law. They came because their favorite ATM was broken, and they heard through the grapevine that the ATM they discarded in the trash was suddenly dispensing $100 bills. No, I said. The single word was incredibly simple, quiet, and completely devoid of any anger, malice, or lingering resentment. It was just a cold, hard, immovable fact. Julian, please, I am begging you. My father finally spoke up, his voice pathetic, weak, and cracking. He is your older brother. We are your family. You have to help us. We have absolutely nothing left. You made your choices, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large, modern foyer. You chose a catered baby shower over your own son's wedding. You chose the illusion of wealth over the reality of hard work. You chose Arthur over me every single day of my entire life. I am not a financial safety net for your spectacularly bad investments. I am not a bank. And I am certainly not your family anymore. My mother started to cry, real, ugly tears this time, tears born of pure, unadulterated desperation and panic. How can you be so incredibly cold to your own mother? After everything we did to raise you, you showed me exactly how incredibly cold this family can be when it suits your narrative, I replied, stepping back into the lobby and grabbing the heavy stainless steel handle of the glass door. I just finally learned the lesson you taught me. I highly suggest you call your buddy Mark. He might have some great commercial real estate advice for you to get out of this hole. Do not ever come to my business or my home again. If you do, my lawyer will enthusiastically handle the trespassing charges. I pulled the heavy glass door shut until the electronic lock clicked loudly, sealing them outside. I turned my back on them and walked steadily up the stairs, returning to my work, leaving them standing entirely alone on the cold sidewalk to face the devastating consequences of their own toxic creation. Later that evening, after a long, highly productive day at the studio, I drove my truck home to the beautiful historic house Clara and I had meticulously restored together. I walked through the heavy wooden front door, and the warm, comforting smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen immediately grounded me, washing away the lingering ghost of my parents' desperate faces. I took off my boots and walked softly upstairs to the second bedroom at the end of the hall. The room was freshly painted a soft, calming sage green. In the exact center of the room, resting on a plush rug, was a wooden crib. I hadn't bought it from a luxury, overpriced baby boutique. I had spent the last 3 consecutive months building it entirely myself, completely by hand, out of solid, beautiful imported cherry wood in the back of my workshop. I ran my calloused hand over the perfectly sanded, incredibly smooth railing, feeling the absolute strength, safety, and integrity of the joints I had glued and clamped myself. It was built to last for generations. Clara walked quietly into the room, resting her hand lightly on her heavily pregnant belly. She smiled at me from the doorway, a warm, completely genuine smile that contained substantially more actual wealth than my brother had ever seen or touched in his entire, fraudulent life. "Did you finally finish those massive blueprints for the downtown project today?" she asked softly, walking over and leaning her head against my shoulder. "I did," I replied, wrapping my arms securely around her waist and pulling her close. "And I took out the trash. The studio is completely clean." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for a second. She knew exactly what I meant. She knew they had come, and she knew they were gone. She kissed my cheeks softly, and we stood there together in the quiet nursery, just looking at the empty crib, waiting for our future to arrive. It took me 29 incredibly painful years and standing in a devastatingly empty wedding chapel to finally, truly understand the absolute truth about the concept of family. Blood does not automatically grant someone a permanent VIP all-access pass to your life, your financial resources, or your emotional well-being. Family is not defined by shared DNA, a common last name, or a forced gathering around a Thanksgiving turkey. Family is defined entirely by mutual respect, unwavering emotional support, and actually showing up for people when it genuinely matters, not just when it benefits their social standing. My parents and my brothers spent their entire lives treating me like a bad investment, a social liability they had to barely tolerate. They constantly tried to break my spirit down just to make themselves feel taller. But the profound irony is that by casting me out, by utterly and completely abandoning me on the day I needed them the absolute most, they didn't diminish my worth at all. They inadvertently set me free. They handed me the exact tools and the brutal clarity I desperately needed to build a massive, impenetrable fortress around my own life, a fortress they are now permanently, legally locked out of. I learned how to be a real man, how to be a dedicated professional, and how to be a fiercely protective father, not from the weak, cowardly man who shared my last name, but from the quiet, dignified landlord who stepped up to the plate when he absolutely didn't have to. William Harrison is the man I proudly invite over for dinner now. William is the man who helped me navigate the corporate world. And William is the man my unborn child will joyfully call Grandpa. Because William understood that true wealth isn't a leased silver sports car, a fake executive job title, or a screaming match at an HOA meeting. True wealth is integrity, kindness, and standing firmly by the people you believe in when the chips are down. I used to carry the intense pain of their constant rejection like a massive, suffocating stone deep in my chest. Now, I look at that pain as the expensive tuition I paid to learn the most valuable, life-altering lesson of my entire existence. You cannot heal, you cannot grow, and you cannot thrive in the exact same toxic environment that made you sick in the first place. Sometimes, the only way to win a rigged, deeply unfair game is to completely walk away from the table, take your chips, and build your own damn casino. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand and walk away from the toxic, manipulative people who shared your bloodline just to protect your own sanity and peace? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and I promise you, no matter how isolating it feels, you are not alone in this fight. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. Until next time, protect your peace fiercely, know your absolute worth, and never, ever let anyone make you feel like a supporting character in your own beautiful life.